Maceda, we have breaking news. We've just learned the Justice Department will seek the death penalty for the convicted shooter in the racially motivated mass shooting at a Buffalo, New York supermarket. The 20-year-old has already been sentenced to life without parole in the state case, but he still faces 27 federal counts, including hate crime and firearm charges. For more, let's bring in ABC News' Morgan Norwood and ABC News legal contributor Brian Buckmeyer. Brian, what goes into this decision of whether or not to seek the death penalty, and why seek it here but not at the state level?
Morning, Dan, or afternoon, sorry. Well, what goes into it is the actual charges themselves, and then also they look to the aggravating factors that they believe they can prove in a case to ultimately get them past that threshold of the death penalty. I'm thinking of the heinousness of the crime, the number of victims, the fact that a crime occurred while the murders were occurring as well as the preparation and the premeditation of the crime. These factors, I think, go into it. And in terms of answering the question why the death penalty at the federal level and not the state level, well, the state of New York doesn't have the death penalty, but the federal government does. And so that's why we're seeing different sentencing levels at different levels of criminal culpability.
Usual is it to seek the death penalty in a federal case?
It's not very unusual. We've seen it a number of times. However, I think it's more unusual on the back end as to whether or not it happens. We saw 13 federal executions near the end of former President Donald Trump's presidency. But before that, there was a 17-year hiatus. In fact, currently, there's a moratorium on the death penalty in the federal government through President Joe Biden. So really, when we talk about the potential for someone being executed, it's really about what future presidents may think about whether or not someone should be put to death.
Morgan, what have you heard from the families on this?
Well, Diana can say that this was a racially motivated attack. And so we know that the DOJ, the Justice Department, has faced growing pressure to send a clear and strong message about these types of cases. So I'd imagine for the family, I mean, look, they've had delays with this case before. I mean, the time that it's taken for the DOJ to decide, I've heard from family members say that this was agonizing for them. So for them, this is the first step as they continue the journey on closure and healing.
Brian, there's a federal hearing set for this afternoon. What do you expect to come out of that?
I think the announcement that they are seeking the death penalty, the justification for it as well, and there might be some negotiation as to when the next court date is, because as you've already told us, the shooter has already pled guilty in state court. One would assume that if he can avoid the death penalty through a plea negotiation, or maybe even plead guilty and do what we saw in Florida with the Florida school shooting where he ultimately got life in prison, this might be a situation where we avoid any litigation as to guilt or innocence and move towards sentencing where pleading guilty could give you a mitigating factor to help avoid the death penalty.
Morgan, how is the community coping with the tragedy and with the fact that this case is still ongoing?
Yeah, I think you just hit the nail on the head. I mean, it's incredibly tough for them, right? I mean, this is heartbreaking. It shattered this predominantly Black community here. And so they are on the journey for closure. They're on the journey for healing. And so that is what they're looking for. They're continuing to reel. And even this process alone is going to be critical as they continue to search for that. I will say that this shooting, brought up a lot of anger, a lot of hurt, a lot of outrage. So it's likely that we're still seeing that linger even as this process continues, Diane.
All right, Morgan Norwood, Brian Buckmeyer, thank you both.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is breaking news that just came out. The Justice Department is going to seek the death penalty for Payton Gendron for what he did in killing 10 people in a Black neighborhood grocery store, Top supermarket in Buffalo, New York, back in May of 2022. I am not opposed to this when it comes down to this dude. They were able to get death penalty charges on Dylan Roof, and I don't see no reason why they should not be able to get the same thing on Payton Gendron. He killed 10 people. 10 innocent people that were just out on a Saturday shopping for themselves and their families. So let's get into it, ladies and gentlemen. The United States believed the circumstances in the count 11 through 20 of the indictment are such that in the event of a conviction, a sentence of death is justified, the filing said. So this is the new court filing from the DOJ, ladies and gentlemen. Lawyers for Gendron previously said they would consider pleading guilty to the federal charges if the death penalty was taken off the table. So it looks like they did not take it off the table at all. Gendron was not in court on Friday when prosecutor Joe Trippi formally notified the judge of the government's intent to seek the death penalty. The defense waived Gendron's appearance, but Judge Lawrence Villardo said he would have to show up in court soon. There's going to come a point in the relative near future when he's going to need to be here. This is what the judge said. So, the next court date that's scheduled for Payton Gendron is February 2nd. Federal prosecutors outlined the reasons why they believe a death penalty sentence is warranted in their filing, saying Gendron intentionally killed 10 people. All right. And the Justice Department also cited Gendron's intentional infliction of bodily injury, intentional participation in an act resulting in death, and blatant racism associated with the shooting. Payton Gendron expressed bias, hatred, and contempt towards Black persons and towards Black persons played a role, the filing said. Well, yeah, none of those people did anything wrong to Payton Gendron, so he sure didn't commit any self defense up in there. He was the villain. Payton Gendron expressed, um, you know, remorse in court, but we know that was rejected. And it should have been rejected. I don't blame the families for not accepting an apology from somebody that killed 10 people. He's got to be kidding me for even doing that in the first place. And then, if y'all remember, he sat there and cried like, who's going to feel anything for this dude? For real. So the defense said they were deeply disappointed in the DOJ's decision to pursue the death penalty. Rather than a prolonged and traumatic capital persecution, the efforts of the federal government would be better spent on combating forces that facilitated this terrible crime. So his defense attorneys are just trying to fight against it, y'all, but that's what they're supposed to do. A federal grand jury returned a 27 count indictment against Gendron on July of 2022, charging him with 14 violations of the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crime Prevention Act, 10 counts of hate crimes resulting in deaths, 3 counts of hate crimes involving an attempt to kill 3 injured individuals, and 1 hate crime count alleging that Gendron attempted to kill additional Black people in and around Tops grocery store, according to the statement from the Department of Justice. He was also charged with 13 firearm offenses. Gendron, y'all remember, he came to YouTube to learn how to shoot. Prior to going out there, he got his lessons on how to modify a weapon right off of YouTube. Gendron was motivated by a racist far right conspiracy known as replacement theory, and he wanted to inspire others to commit similar attacks, according to the criminal complaint. Markings on the rifle used to shoot included phrases, here's your reparations, and the replacement, the great replacement. And he also had the N word on there as well, y'all. Let's not ever forget that. Garland has pursued 2 death penalty cases under his tenure, and so I guess Payton will be the third. He'll be the third. So the decision to seek the death penalty follows more than a year of deliberations inside of the Justice Department. Garland has been open in previous public appearances about his concern regarding the death penalty, and President Joe Biden campaigned on formally abolishing it from the federal level. But in the absence of a formal policy instituted by the Biden administration, the DOJ officials have debated over a so called worst of the worst threshold when recommending a death penalty sentence is appropriate in some of the most egregious cases of hate fueled mass acts of terror. The family members of the victim said they met with prosecutors this past Friday and they learned at that time about the death penalty being sought by the DOJ. So, y'all, I don't have no problem with this decision when it comes down to Payton Gendron because he acted on pure racism and wickedness. He really did. And I just don't see anything, even when I listen to the case, I don't see where anybody did anything to him. You know, it is a big difference between someone doing something to you and your hatred for Black people. And I find that in many of these cases, nothing has even happened to the person that's pulling the trigger. In most cases, you just get all worked up from a lot of it is what you're raised on. You get radicalized at home. And then the internet just, you know, just amplifies the racism. But all of this comes from home. And I have no doubt Peyton got this from his parents when he was being raised. So, y'all, you have to tell me what you think about this one. As far as I'm concerned, Peyton Gendron is getting exactly what he deserved. I don't feel not 1 ounce of sorrow for this beast because that's what he is to me. You're going to have to tell me what you think about this in the comment section. Please leave your comment and subscribe. Don't forget to hit on the notification bell, and I'll see you on the next video. Peace, family.